a disclaimer immediately before I start rolling the official deck here. I'm in the presence of many heroes, and we're hearing about lots of bona fide heroes today. I'm not a hero. I tried to make the walk all the way from the hotel down to downtown Limassol. That was going to be heroism that my wife could witness, that I was able to rise to the occasion despite my weight, and an age, and that did not work well. I had to bail out and take the 30 bus pretty early, and then I tried to do some weightlifting for her, and I spent most of last night trying to nurse my knee back to shape. So I am not a hero. I want you to know that for sure. You probably already deduced it, but I'm not a hero. Okay, so let's get started. The next thing to make clear is that everything you're going to hear about, and indeed everything I do professionally, is made possible by brilliant people in my laboratory. So the RARE lab is now shown on screen. It's an AI and reasoning lab, and it's called an AI and reasoning lab for good reason. Everything we do is based ultimately on computational logic. So there's nothing like a computational logician trying to be a hero. Again, let's cleanse our minds of that thought. But you see the question that I do want to grapple with a bit with you today. I want to tip my hand and give you the answer right off the bat. It's a resounding no. And it does relate, the negative answer, to some of what Theo said about my overall position. But let's put this answer in historical context. Here we are in the lovely city of Limassol in 2015. I'm talking to you, the great country of Cyprus. I probably wouldn't be here were it not for the fact that I do, with plenty of help from other people again, build smart robots. And these were some self-aware robots that made their way across the world in the media. They're pretty smart. They're not heroes, but they're pretty smart, and that's, I think, ultimately what brings me here. But we have to do some time travel to see what the true historical basis is of the work I do. So we have to go back a number of centuries, in fact, at least to 1666 and Leibniz. And that's a picture of the guy. Now, there probably are some in the audience who dreaded having to study calculus at some point. He was the co-inventor. That is the integral sign that you're seeing there. That is part of his notation. So school kids are still getting affected by Leibniz. For me, what was most important about what he did is that he dreamed of a universal computational logic. He dreamed of a logic so powerful that it would capture all thinking in the human race, all thinking in the species, and in fact, all mechanical or machine thinking. And this was a dream he had throughout his life and never dropped it. It was part of his dissertation. And so he had some help, but the dream continues. There's Boole, intervening years. Maybe you've heard of Boolean algebra or Boolean logic. He was the inventor. But then an amazing thing happened in 1956. The field of AI was born. At least this is the United States point of view. The Brits have a slightly different take on things. But in 56, this famous conference was stolen by someone named Herb Simon, unfortunately deceased at this point. He showed up with a system called Logic Theorist. And what the system did that was unprecedented was that it proved theorems that had been solely in the province of the human mind up till that point. And there were some pretty clever people at this conference. And again, he stole the show. So that continues the thread that I see myself advancing. But the real question is what happens in the future, okay, beyond 2015 and 2020. So there's a thread that runs back a long way. It does go back all the way to Aristotle. Aristotle was really the first person to do logic and also to consider the question of, well, is the human mind based on logic? And if so, how could we work out the details? So there we have it. Is that thread going to produce eventually future heroes that are robots? Now, my answer this time is a resounding yes. Now, that should strike you as somewhat odd. Didn't the logic guy just contradict himself? No, yes, what's the real story here? Well, what's going on, as the alert among you realizes that there are really two questions here. There's the question that's the official title for the talk, can robots be bona fide heroes? And then there's the question in general, can a robot be a hero? A little bit less precise. So the answers are different. Now, in order to explain this, I need a little bit of context. And in order to produce the context, I need a collection of ethical concepts that actually probably most of you will find familiar. They range all the way from fiendish and devilish activity, which is indicated by the box there in front of you called deviltry, on up through just uncivil or nasty behavior to behavior that breaks the bounds of what we would normally consider to be moral obligations. And then we have actions that are morally neutral. It's morally neutral for me to move this clicker in any particular direction. And then we head up to the positive side. We get to the point where people are obeying, or at least generally, their obligations. But then we start reaching the point that is a little bit more praiseworthy. So here is what the hierarchy looks like from the bottom to the top. And the top part is our concern today. This is the part that philosophers have traditionally called, sorry for the fancy word in advance, the supererogatory. What they really mean is above and beyond the call of duty. And that's what heroes are about. Heroes are not merely about fulfilling their everyday obligations, as nice as that is when people do it. They're about reaching beyond that point. And by the way, the origins of this hierarchy comes to us from none other than Leibniz. So the question is, where do we position robots in this hierarchy? Now, at this point, where we have morally neutral robots and robots that meet their obligations, I think we can manage that. I think we can handle the engineering. In fact, in my briefcase downstairs, I have a little robot that, as a matter of fact, is right there. He never does anything wrong, okay? He meets all his obligations. But it's such a simple robot that that's really not anything worth writing home about. What happens when we add autonomy and power to the mix? That's the question, and this is one of the big things that I work on, and this relates to what Theo was talking about in terms of the Google cars, the hypothetical Google cars. So let me just say a few words about this before we return to the main narrative. I advocate choosing one future over another future. We have two futures facing us on this planet. There they are. Those diagrams won't mean a huge amount to you, but if there's anyone in here who has a device like an iPhone, etc., you'll know there's a difference between an app on the iPhone versus the operating system of the iPhone. You don't get access to the operating system. If we continue to build things and tamper with things merely at the level above the operating system, we will continue to see what we've just seen from VW. What happened there? The CEO has resigned. The loss will be in the billions. What happened? The software at a high level was cheating. It was sensing when the tests were coming and saying, I'm better than you think I am. There you go. What's going to happen in the future, folks, is that that's going to be done by the robots themselves if we're not careful. They will autonomously be adapting their own code for their own purposes if we're not careful. The other future says, no, work at the operating system level. And this is what I would say about Theo's example, and not only Google, but any other aspirants in the self-driving car area. Start giving the researchers of my type access to operating system level controls with our ethical logics. That would be a very sane thing to do. All right, so let's go back to the, there's a little emphasis for you in case you didn't detect the passion that I have for that future. Let's go back to the main narrative now at this point. We know we can do that. We can put robots in that category, or at least if you trust me, you will know it. Okay, what about heroic robots? That is to say, what about trying to get robots into the realm of the kind, which is what I mean there by civil, genuinely kind robots, and then heroes? This is a much more difficult engineering problem. Why? There are three main reasons, because there are three, if you will, high-level attributes that are required for, I claim, at least moral heroism. So number one, you have to be able to do some basic clever problem solving and planning. Number two, you have to do some supererogatory stuff. You have to do some things that are above and beyond the call of duty. And those of you who were here earlier in the day have seen some human beings up on this stage and projected doing exactly that, which is why I feel, again, extremely humbled. Three, all heroes, I claim, have to have conquered something that requires almost everything they have before they emerge to bona fide heroism. It might be fear, it might be self-doubt, it might be getting to the point where you don't just behave on the basis of what other people want from you, but doing what you yourself realize you ought to do. Now let me just show you some content here that relates to failure of condition one. This is based on some robots that made their way around the media. Again, sort of a small, for tech people, more than a blip on the global tech stage. So let's take a look at this video where in another laboratory, the robots are not really figuring things out well. The H robot represents a human. If the code is real, the simulations, of course, are a bit artificial. In this case, the robot trying to guard the pit that's down there by the other goal succeeds. Now the robot faces two humans heading toward danger. Well, it's not bad. At least one is saved. That's not good. Both humans perish from the indecision and lack of intelligence on the part of the robot. And this is work done by Alan Winfield, who has his own answers about some of these challenges. Again, simulation looks a little toy-like, you'll agree, but the underlying technology is real. So I want to put a check next to the first one, courtesy of work done in my laboratory, and it echoes work done by other people. Let's take a look at another video with some rather different results. One wounded soldier. This just shows you under the hood, for those who care, that this is not in any way fake. So one robot with one medical kit and one wounded soldier. This should be a cakewalk. It is. Soldiers saved. Two injured soldiers, you're batting 500. It's like what you saw previously, not bad. It's thinking. And I think you know what's going to happen right now. This is really what we want from our robots in the future, level 1 or condition 1. Some degree of cleverness in the face of morally difficult circumstances. So the robot in this case passes. Just a little look for anybody that 1 in a million might care. There's actually a math to this, but let's not go there. All right, so what about the second condition? Remember, 3 conditions for heroism, particularly moral heroism. The second condition is the supererogatory realm. Can you do something that's self-sacrificial in the robotic realm, for example? And the answer there is yes, and that's part of what my lab is working on. So let's take a look at another video. I don't know if there are any Sesame Street fans out there, but the ultimate save might be to prevent Bert from reaching an untimely end. So that's Sesame Street character Bert, who's facing an oncoming robot. All right? If the robot hits Bert, that's not a good thing. Bert's going to perish. Now that's the sound of the robot. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the Sparky bot to work, and got the Now working, the second robot working fine. So the Now above sees what's going on. If you know anything about robots of that type, actually, that really is self-sacrifice. I'm going to have to talk to my PhD students about this video because I'm not sure the Now survived. But Bert is saved. Okay, so and just a little look under the hood. Is this real? Absolutely. We'll be talking about this from a technical perspective coming up later in the month in Portugal. And to really zero in case there are any academics or engineers out there, we have a super ergation operator in our logics. All right. What about condition 3? You need all 3 for a robot to be a bona fide hero. No. That's the problem. Remember I told you, you have to conquer something deep and deeply challenging to be a bona fide hero. A robot can't do that, and I can prove it to you. Here's the sequence. It's actually quite simple. Number 1, all bona fide heroes are conquerors. I've already told you that. In order to be a conqueror, you would have to conquer something like fear. Robots don't have emotions. They're not conscious. Let's keep going. Ergo, robots cannot be bona fide heroes. They can only be mere heroes with scare quotes. I'll give them that much. They got 2 of the 3 conditions. Now, you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, that's a proof? Even I remember, I took geometry, but the years ago, or maybe I'm in it now, or it's a few, but it was a lot more rigorous than that. Says who, Selmer? Who says robots can't experience fear, any emotions indeed, or consciousness? Well, if you had to wager right now, you probably would pick Leibniz, and sure enough, in the book that Theo mentioned in '92, I defended Leibniz's position on this. His position was no machine can have any emotions, cannot have the kind of consciousness that requires inner feelings. There's the 92 book, if you would want to take a look at it, which is somewhat doubtful. But what was his argument? Well, I can show you what his argument is very quickly. I can encapsulate it. There's a robot. The best I could do with existing clip art to show some degree of fear or apparent fear in the part of the robot. So a human shows up, and Leibniz says, okay, let's play a little game here. Let's engage in a little thought experiment. I think there was a movie in at least the 20th century called Fantastic Voyage, or a TV show or something. I've heard this that relates to this. But Leibniz said, look, what if you could get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and so small indeed that you could pass into the brain of a machine, of a mere machine, a robot. What would you find there? Well, we know what you would find in the case of any of my robots or anyone else's robots. You would find that. And I have the little creature showing up there. There should be a special effect there where he kind of gives you a point of view. He's in there, right? What does the person see? Leibniz said, if I go into a mill and watch the gears grinding, that's all I see. I'm not going to see fear or consciousness or anything like that. What we specifically see in the case of robots, for people who are studying computer science or such things or might want to know more, that's actually a picture of the Turing machine from Alan Turing of the Imitation Game movie fame. That is a relatively good depiction of a Turing machine. No consciousness. So if we ask, what do you see? This will be the report back. I don't see anything at the emotional level. What do we conclude from this? Well, we go back to the argument that I claim is completely valid, and we end up with a check in the second premise, the one that's challenged, and therefore we end up with another check on the final conclusion. Now, where do we go from here to conclude? Remember the hierarchy that I gave you, going from the deviltry, the fiendish behavior, all the way to the heroic. And by the way, for Leibniz, Christian that he was, there actually was an endpoint beyond what you're seeing that was God that made the whole thing, in his opinion, coherent and sensible. But I have not included that. So, well, here's the problem now, or here's the framework that we have to operate. It's problematic because it'll be a little bit trickier. This is what the human race is going to have to do. This is what the engineers like me are going to have to do. We can talk about robot ethics and machine ethics all we want, but we're going to have one level for humans and one level for machines. So we're going to have two. Why? Because we're going to have a different supererogatory portion. We are going to have to put scare quotes around the case of civil behavior or heroic behavior in the case of the robots. They can act that way behaviorally, but they really won't have what it takes to be a true hero. And so we'll put the robots there, and we'll put us there, and that concludes the talk. Thank you very much.